G'day ladies and gents, and welcome back to War Thunder. Today we're going to have a look at the T-44 and the T-44-122, and I'll discuss why one of them is my favourite, but the other one is definitely worth having around. So recently I've been using the T-44-122 and now the T-44 to grind out my Tier 4 Russians. I went and put a talisman on the T-44, and I've been using the T-44-122 since 2016. I bought it, I think it was on April Fool's with the Russian bias pack, and I haven't changed the decals since 2016. Couple of funny stories. I remember going into a match. I can't remember what map it was, but we had a T-29 on our team, and he team killed me for having the Trump sign on the side of my turret. Some people, man, they just take politics too seriously. Anyway, the T-44-122. I personally like it. I think it's an alright tank. A lot of people seem to struggle with it, but the way you're supposed to play it is as a tank destroyer. And rather than sort of push the front line with it, like a lot of people do with Russian tanks, because Russian tanks are generally designed, and the way they work in the game is that they're the meta, to push and just push aggressively and relentlessly push, and that's how they win. Whereas other nations, you need to be a little bit more measured. And the T-44-122 happens to fall outside that standard Russian meta and falls in the other ones, so to speak, I guess. It's a little bit more measured. Slower reload, it's a little bit more vulnerable, and it's just overall not as maneuverable. So what you need to do is you need to find a sneaky spot, you need to find a place where no one's looking for enemies, sit there, take out a few, and then move on, or move up, move back, depending on how the match is flowing. You shouldn't be allergic to capture points, but you shouldn't take capture points as your priority. You should be looking to support with that 122mm gun, especially at 6.3, where you could be used to take out enemies like King Tigers and Yag Tigers, especially from the side. And trust me, as a Russian team, you would be thankful to have a T-44-122 on the side taking out Yag Tigers, because at 7.3, I don't actually think there is a tank, maybe with the exception of the ASUs and the BMPs, that can take out a Yag Tiger from the front. Without the lower glacis, of course, but that's beside the point. This tank is a support tank. It's not a frontline tank. And a lot of people play it that way, and a lot of people die in it. That's why you rarely see them around, because it's difficult to play. It's actually not that easy to run around with the 122. The gun itself is pretty good, to be honest. There's not a whole lot I can fault about it, apart from it having an extremely long reload, and occasionally it doesn't set off in terms of the fuse. The fuse doesn't set off as quickly as you would hope, or as you would expect of a natural Russian tank, because they tend to have a really light fuse. The 85 is a really good example of that. You tend to get really good detonations out of 85mm guns, but the 122, I've had several occasions where I've just hit a Hellcat and nothing's happened to it. And to be honest, that's quite upsetting, especially because one may be barreling towards you and you've got nothing else to throw back at them. Or you could have missed out on a kill or an ace or something nice like that, and you're just not going to get it. As you can see, that reload cost me a jumbo kill and potentially the kill on the Pershing, because I would have probably turned around and figured out that there's a Pershing there, had the gun reloaded and popped off another shot and killed it. It's a bit of a shame, to be honest. So with my tail between my legs, I decided to jump into the T-44 to try and redeem myself. And turns out redeem myself I did. The T-44 is an astoundingly good tank, and personally it is to my playstyle, which is to be very aggressive. Now, the T-44-85, personally, whilst being my favourite, is not necessarily the be-all and end-all. You still need those supports, and at 6.3 you will still face Yag Tigers. So you definitely need something on the sides to take them out, whilst the T-44-85 can certainly do that. I think the 122 is a bit more suited for that role, whereas the T-44 is better for street brawling and capturing points and doing light flanks, like flanking around the street corner when a heavy tank has gotten itself into a confined city environment. In this case, though, I'm getting a fair amount of down tiers. So I'm the main spearhead, which is really, really nice. I enjoy being the main spearhead of an attack. And that just tends to suit my playstyle. So currently sitting at 6.3, you get this really, really nice battle rating. And you essentially just use the T-44s as your mainline push, your frontline push. And you use the T-44-122 as your support, I guess. I find that the T-44-122 also works better when there are fewer enemies around. Not saying, if there are 0 enemies, then it works the best. But it tends to work better when you're only facing 1 or 2 enemies at a time. As soon as you get into a fight where you're severely outnumbered, then you start to really, really suffer with that long reload. The T-44-85 tends to not suffer as much because whilst it lacks the penetration, it has that rate of fire which allows it to keep going. And when you're getting down tiers, you're facing fewer and fewer King Tigers, and you're facing fewer and fewer Yag Tigers, Centurions, etc. And pretty much you can just fire on the move, not have to worry about aiming. It's glorious. It's just glorious Soviet technology at its finest. At a BR that is perfect for it. To be just such an aggressor. And I've been having a ball, honestly, playing this thing. A lot of people tend to overlook the regular T-44, but honestly, give it a go. You will be pleasantly surprised, particularly when you get those engine upgrades. As I understand it, the T-44 got an engine upgrade from the T-34-85, which is, if I remember correctly, why they had to put the engine in sideways rather than lengthways, which is what they did in the T-34. But it's a speedy boy. It's a really, really nice, quick tank that has a decent amount of armor, a decent gun. I can see why it was the fucking meta in Thunder League Season 1, because it was just so all-rounded. And then you've got the T-44-122, which is very specific. So, whilst the T-44-85 is my personal favourite, you can't underestimate the contribution you can potentially make as a T-44-122 to your team. So I would personally recommend having both in your lineup, particularly over having something like an ASU-85, because you need that turret. That turret is actually really, really helpful because you can put that mobility to use, turn the turret when you need it, and you have a really, really good support tank. It's really, really good for late game as well when you're facing fewer enemies. And honestly, I would still recommend that you buy it if you're looking for something at Tier 4 to grind the Russians. It's really, really fun. And whilst it takes a lot of patience, you can get a really, really good reward out of it. Using that solid lineup, I love it, personally. It's the way I like to do things. Anyway, ladies and gents, 5 kills in the T-44, 2 in the 122. Couldn't really ask for more. Good game. We ended up winning that. But yeah, take care, and I'll catch you next time.